Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of The New Standard. And let me add my colleague to the show. What's happening, Neil? How are you?
Nothing. You started a minute early. Don't tell me I wasn't on time. Knew you were going to do that too.
You did? Okay.
Why am I so much closer today?
Oh, well, we get to see your, I think it's there it is.
Oh, there we go.
That's if, we wanted to get your beautiful mug.
No, you
we
didn't.
wanted to get your beautiful mug. But
Don't need
listeners,
to lie.
welcome to another episode of the New Standard, a Steeler podcast for Steeler Nation. As always, joining me is my co-host Neil Coulong. And if you want to find the show, you can find it on all podcast platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, so on and so forth. You'll find the show there. Just do a search for the New Standard. You can also find the show on YouTube. Do a search for the New Standard, Lance Williams or Neil Coulong. When you get to YouTube, make sure you subscribe and you like the shows. We got about 10 previous shows. Make sure you check those as well and give us a like and a listen on those. Quick programming note, there will be no new show next weekend. I think me and Neil are going to take some much needed R&R for Memorial Day weekend. I hope all of you travel to see your loved ones, and hopefully you do it safely in this particular time in the country with the pandemic going on. Hopefully everyone can see their loved ones on that weekend. It'll be the first time that I'll be able to see my mom for the last probably about 18 months due to the pandemic. So I'm pretty excited about that. What's going on with you, Neil?
I just finished a ton of yard work that I got up at about 6 a.m. to do before the heat in the Pittsburgh area that's coming through this weekend descended upon the area. And I'm not done. So I'm going to end up having to be out in the heat anyway, but most of it is done. And I rushed back in here to shower all of the dirt off of myself before joining you fine people to talk some Steelers football. So this is a much needed break. It's getting warm.
So we get sexy, Neil, the Neil that's freshly coiffed.
I'm not sure where that is, but
fresh as a daisy. We get a sexy Neil. One thing before we hop into the program, we're going to talk about what are the Steelers' biggest needs in a rebuild. But before we do that, I wanted to just make a comment on one of the comments that we got in the show. And the comment was about last week's show when we gave our predictions for the season. I think we were both at 7-11 and 11. But I think we got there different ways with different games. I'm not certain. And the comment was, you guys give us a lot of hope about next season. And I just wanted to say, you should not be getting hope from us, right?
Dealing that out.
We're exactly. It's if you want to draw hope for the season, just look at what the Steelers are doing and draw your own conclusions. What we give you is just our perspective, and that's all. I mean, the way we see it from our viewpoint, we see it as a 7-11 team. We see a team in transition. And so I want to transition to you, Neil, because we're talking about what are the priorities in the rebuild. Are the Steelers in a rebuild?
Simply put, yeah. I mean, I don't think there's another way to put it. The amount of players that they let walk / weren't able to sign, the players that they drafted as really being plug and play guys at positions of not, generally speaking, not high-end value for a team. These are the players they needed to have to step in right away. And I'm not saying that they're bad. I think Najee Harris is going to be a great player. Other people are sold on Freiermuth more than I am. I think Green's going to be a pretty good player. These are not likely to be all pro level guys. And that's not a knock against them at all. All of them are far more necessary than they are talented, if that makes sense. I think they're decent players. They have some value, but these are players that you need to have to build up a better core of a team. They don't have a core of a team. They only have 30 guys signed for next year. Their roster isn't even complete for this year. They are literally rebuilding the team. And the fact that even gets argued among people surprises me. I don't understand how else it could be argued. Ben coming back is more than anything about his salary cap position. not his desire to win one more title. They're nowhere close to a title contending team this year. They're going to tell you that that's not the case, but I don't think there's a year they've ever said that they weren't a title contending team. It's not going to be this season. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think at some point you have to turn the car around to get it going forward again. And that's where they are. Most people complain about how the Ravens or the Browns are passing them by. It's like, well, the Browns have been at the bottom for I don't know how long. That's not even worth talking about. They finally get things right and do things the right way. You're right. They have a good team. Baltimore missed the playoffs 3 years in a row. They drafted 7 overall not that long ago. They had a downtime. I don't know why we forget about this, but they weren't a great team not that long ago. You have to do these things in order to continue the level of success that you're able to have. The Steelers have been greatly benefited by the fact for the better part of 2 decades they've had an all-pro level quarterback.
Exactly.
They don't have that anymore. They need to find another one. Hopefully for them, it doesn't take as long as the time between the end of Bradshaw and the start of Ben. But I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work out. They might get decent play out of Ben this year. That's the best outlook that you can get. They're rebuilding everything else around them. That's why they have a completely new offensive line. On top of that, Lance, it's one thing that people don't seem to remember about this. Every coach on that staff, with the exception of Tomlin and Keith Butler, are first or second year.
Right.
They've known this was coming. This has been their plan for a while. They needed to shift into something else. And that's obviously what's going on. I don't think that's a bad thing. Okay, they can have a little bit of a down year. It happens to everybody. There's a reason why the Steelers have not winning the championship year in and year out. They are the team that has by far and away the longest streak of seasons at or above 500. I think theirs is 17 now. Seattle is second with 9. All right, that's a long gap between the two, and Seattle has arguably had a better team over that stretch of time. They came far closer to winning their second title than the Steelers did, winning their third. So, all right, fine. Give that to Pittsburgh. But by and large, Seattle has not been a bad team by any stretch of the imagination. And they're probably not going to be bad this year either. So at some point, though, you need to kind of get things moving again. And I think that's where Pittsburgh is now.
And the interesting thing I think you said is that gap between Bradshaw and Roethlisberger. I mean, I'm of the age where I remember that very vividly and very clearly. Steeler Nation is, very mixed, very diverse, very big. And demographically, there is a large segment of Steeler Nation, similarly to that team up north that, typically, we don't like on this particular podcast, where you have a generation of Steeler fans that don't know bad times. You have a large number of Steeler fans that had only, they only remember Cowher and they remember Tomlin and they only remember winning. So I don't think rebuilding is a bad thing. At some point you have to do it, and it's called sexy tanking, and they could be somewhat successful this year. And I don't want people to misinterpret where they are and where they're going, but they could be successful this year, and that's fine. But I think the things that you pointed out, it's pretty clear. The rebuild is happening and it's starting. And, the last thing I want to jump into real quick before we jump into the first question about, the priorities of the rebuild is, will Ben play for another team? I just want to throw this out real quick.
Yeah,
I don't think.
Throw it out and throw it away.
Throw it out and throw it away. Okay, that's it. So let's say Ben plays pretty well this year. I don't think he's going to be a Steeler again. I think the Rooneys will make that tough decision if he plays pretty well and wants to come back. I think they'll make that tough decision that, we're committed to the rebuild and we're going to move forward. We did what we had to do for this year. Can you see him suiting up in another team?
No, I can't. I don't. Ben is the one who said he wanted to play through this year. I mean, I don't know why people forget that. He set a date on this. He said this was going to be his last season. Because we haven't entered into the pomp and circumstances of a farewell tour does not mean that that's not clearly what's happening here. His game is deteriorating. He's made a lot of money. It's not as if this team is on the verge of greatness, and an average season from him is going to get them to a championship. I don't see why he would want to come around for one more season. And the team, from a financial perspective as well as a roster building perspective, they need to move on. They have to get cheap at that position because despite the constant conversations of this in social media, the Steelers salary cap position is not that great next year. I'm not saying it's bad. It's not nearly as fantastic as everyone's making it out to be. You don't have TJ Watt signed. You're on the fence with whoever your second tackle is going to be, right or left, whether that Zach Banner joining somebody at left tackle, at left or right tackle. You don't know who that's going to be. You have one cornerback signed outside of guys on rookie contracts. Those are expensive positions, and you don't have that. And Minka, you got to pay Minka at some point too, right? I mean, you probably want to do that. He's on the hook for $10 million next year. An extension for him isn't lowering that cap number much. It's going to be the same for Watt. Watt's salary cap number, almost any way they slice this, is going to be probably $17-18 million.
Yeah, it's going to be north of 17.
Whatever figure you want to look at to determine where they are on next year's salary cap, it's not that they're in a bad position. It's that they don't have anybody signed. They have a lot of holes that they need to fill. And all of that is assuming, unless, Lance, you're excited for the inevitable Mason Rudolph versus Dwayne Haskins quarterback battle next year. They're weak at the best position in the game. So salary cap space, I mean, it's nice and all. They're going to need to sign a starter or two probably next year, and they're going to be able to afford to do that. They're not bringing in a bunch of high level guys. They needed to ace this draft, which, as we've talked about, I think they did a pretty good job filling the holes that they needed to fill immediately and in the future. And next year, they need to ace that draft as well. They need to bring in another 3-4 starters within a year or two in order to rebuild the depth of the team that they no longer have. So the salary cap's not working in their favor all that much, considering the likelihood of it being around $210 million, which I think is a fair estimate. Where we sit today, could be more, but where we sit today is probably going to be around that mark, which is a substantial increase, but it's not all that high in comparison to where it was going in 2019. They lost a year. So all things considered, I think they're not able to just say everything's going to be fine next year. That you're really going to feel the pain of that rebuild next year when you're going into that season and still having question marks about who's doing what. And that's with a fairly even to rosy outlook for what the team is going to be like this season.
Let's jump right into this show. Let's ask the first question. So we've determined that we both feel that the Steelers are in a rebuild. So let me toss this to you, Neil. Who should define the football or positional priorities for this team in terms of the rebuild? Who should define that? Should it come from ownership? Should it come from the coaching staff? Should it be a collaboration of the two? Who should define what the priorities are from a positional standpoint?
For me, and this is kind of an old school approach, but for me, the general direction is your owners to decide if your owner is very much a football guy. There are owners who aren't, and they kind of cede that direction to somebody else. In the Steelers' case, I think Art Rooney too is active enough to say the 25,000 foot level, this is what we want. The Rooneys are known for kind of jumping in and insisting that they do this or that or the other thing, but typically they're about as hands-on, I think, as an owner should be. But the nuts and bolts of it, the grass level stuff, is philosophical choices made by your general manager. You're paying the general manager to be in charge of the operation. They're laying the vision out. They're working with the head coach in a cooperative way to find the talent that they need to achieve certain philosophical goals. They want to run the ball, so we need this, and this. They want to be able to throw in this situation, so they want this, and this. All of those things to me are general manager questions. And I think, and we've spoken about this often, the fact that both Kevin Colbert and Mike Tomlin got extensions well ahead of when the team would normally announce that they're getting them, in my opinion, is saying, along with this is what we want to do. Philosophically, we feel that Mike is our guy. We feel that Kevin is our guy. We want to go in this direction. So we're going to give you an extension. Here are your marching orders. Go figure out how to do these things. That's what we want. We're giving you the job security that I feel that you've earned. And with that, we want to do this. We have to rebuild that. I don't want to spend more than this year. I'll spend more in this season, but not this one. All those things are hashed out between them collectively, I think. But generally speaking, simply put, it's the general manager's job to determine what the best way to go is. And it's the head coach's job to assist in finding the players to fit that philosophy and then coach them to that philosophy.
From my perspective, I don't disagree. I think if you're signing the checks, you can set the vision. I think the vision has to start with we want to win consistently. Then you go to step two. How do we do that? And I think where the owner comes in is what is the philosophy of our football team that's going to give us the best chance and best opportunity to win. And as long as there is a collaborative approach and open communication between the levels of ownership, GM, and coach, I'm cool with that. But I think you said an important thing. I think it depends on the competency of the ownership group. There are ownership groups that merely should just sign the checks, where a football team is merely a trophy for them. It's a sign of we've achieved generational wealth. This is our trophy. Having a football team says we've arrived and we're in a certain class, a
Oh,
la
I
a
don't know
Daniel
about that.
Snyder.
I mean, if it was me, if I owned a team, what I would say is I like to think I know a lot about this, but I have the money and the resources to hire people who really know a lot about it, and
Right.
I'm going to cede to them on this. There are owners who are like that. I understand exactly what you're saying, and that definitely exists.
Ego.
Although I don't think as much in the NFL as in some other sports, but it is as far as understanding the roles of everybody there, that is up to the owner. Jimmy Haslam's the guy I was thinking of, probably above anything else, and he destroyed that franchise for the better part of 15 years. It wasn't until he backed away when he couldn't find a head coach or a general manager who wanted to work with him anymore because of his desire to interject what he thinks is football knowledge to everything. They didn't go anywhere. And now they are, because they're making smart decisions, and they had a boatload of capital stored up because they never used any of it because they made bad decisions all the time. So there are owners who can add to that. It's fun to rip on Jerry Jones. We always do. Jerry Jones isn't stupid. He understands how to run a team. He gets that to a certain level. I mean, I'm not saying that he's the greatest thing that the game has ever seen, but he has made himself the general manager of his team. That's the role that he takes on for himself. And he does a reasonable job of it. There are worse general managers every single year. He's outlasted all of them, probably because he's his own boss. But
Yes.
I think there are owners who back away intentionally because they hire people to do those things and hold them accountable to the results, which is very black and white, very simple. You'd be smart to do that in a lot of cases. There are some who probably exert too much of themselves, thinking their success or their inherited wealth, those things give them the ability to say, we can do this, we can do that. I think the best and the most successful combinations of owners and general managers tend to be the ones where they know their roles and they
Yes.
work and operate within them to the expectations that we probably don't fully know about. We see, though, top to bottom, there are failures of expectations, and there are things that just don't work. It's not always a bad thing for a general manager to get fired. Sometimes it's just, we got to go a different way. I'm going to find somebody new just because we need to do everything new, and you're not new. So that happens, I think, in the NFL. But owners don't meddle as much as we might think that they do, and they're certainly not all going to be expert level, subject matter experts on football in general. Brass tacks, you need football people to run football.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, that's where when you're an individual that can afford a football team, there's a level of hubris that comes along with that because you've been highly successful. I mean, and sometimes you think that success translates to everything and that you're smart in everything. I understand that. So in the Steelers, I think what I'm gleaning from what you're saying is that Colbert is going to be the guy that the Rooneys may set the vision. Colbert's going to be the guy that creates the actual plan on how to do that in collaboration with Tomlin. If that's the case and that's what you're saying, I think that's how it should be done. You hire competent people, you give them the overall vision, and they put the mechanisms in place to get it moving and to execute it. So, with that being said, what do you think are the priorities outside of quarterback? And we'll talk about quarterback separately. So, outside of quarterback, what are the positional groups in a rebuild for this particular team are the most important?
For me, I think it's the offensive line. And the reason I would say that above anything else is if you look at the post Super Bowl, the 2008 2010 Steelers. The rebuild from that, which was minor because they were fairly young, they had a lot of talent that they had to sign. They were trying to keep everything together to make multiple runs at it. That didn't work out. But one of the biggest things that held them back in the new CBA, in other words, from 2011 on through, right away, was they were directionless when it came to their offensive line. You and I have talked about this a lot over the years. They had no idea of what they wanted in offensive linemen. They didn't know how to pay them. They didn't know how to coach them. And I say that because everything about that situation, your Jonathan Scott's and Mike Adams decisions, things like that, they brought in players who didn't fit with anything that they were trying to do. And they flat out embarrassed themselves. They went through 2-3 offensive line coaches pretty quickly. And you look around consistently, they don't get rid of coaches at one position that quickly, that often. It just seemed like there was a disconnect between scouting and personnel as far as the players that they wanted, the schemes that they were running. All of that ended, in my mind, in 2014 when they brought in Mike Munchak. Now, I'm going to guess, I'm putting on my assumption hat here. I'm going to guess Mike Munchak did not take that job unless he was given certain assurances that he would have say over this or that or the other thing. I say that because I don't know a professional football coach that if they had the ability to ask for that they wouldn't. They're not team players, okay? Mike Munchak was a head coach who wasn't even fired until he had a disagreement with his ownership, a group that wanted to step in and tell him what to do. They wanted him to fire a certain amount of coaches that were on his staff. He wouldn't do it. That's why the Titans fired him. It wasn't a lack of ability. It wasn't a lack of success. He did a pretty good job for the talent that they had in place. Munchak is a proven excellent coach at the NFL level and has been for years. He wanted to just be an offensive line coach if he wasn't going to be a head coach. So with that, all right, I'll come into Pittsburgh. This is the money that I want. These are the things that I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to teach. These are the kinds of players that I want. I need you to tell me or put in writing that I'm going to have the ability to have say over that. Not every coach gets that, but if they have the ability to ask for it, they're going to. And I think Munchak did that. Now, the Mike Adams thing, I'll say in a counterpoint to everything that I just said. Mike Adams was the prototypical tackle, athletic, big, good experience, a knucklehead. But maybe, that one didn't work out as well for him as they would have wanted. They took him in the second round, not the first. So not all that great. But you see in that, considering how big the red flag was on Mike Adams, the fact they still took him at all is probably the offensive line coach telling him, I need a tackle. They didn't have any tackles. They were terrible. Do you remember that? That team was awful in protection. 2011, 12, 13, they were terrible in protection. 13, all right, not entirely their fault, but it was David DeCastro's wayward block on Maurkice Pouncey that blew out his knee 8 plays into the season. That destroyed the entire line. So Munchak comes in, no more cut blocking. We're keeping guys healthy, and we need to start building talent. We need to start developing guys. From Munchak's time in Pittsburgh, they probably had the best offensive line in the NFL. So my point here is not to say bring back Mike Munchak. It's that the Steelers are aware of the value of that offensive line. So much of the success that they had was due to the fact that their offensive line was really good. It was consistent. They kept guys in place. I mean, they had a fairly expensive team, but they developed a lot of them too. They had top to bottom. They had all pro guys taken in the first round, and they had nobodies playing really well at a Pro Bowl level from undrafted free agency. Kelvin Beachum was maybe the best tackle we've seen in 20 years. He was a 7th-round pick. As a guard, they made him into an all-pro tackle. Alejandro Villanueva came from Afghanistan to be at least kind of an all-pro level player. He was pretty good. So I think the Steelers are going to value that offensive line above anything else. And while they made a good investment in the 3rd round, I think a fairly decent investment in the 4th round this year. Those aren't premium guys yet. It wasn't maybe the year to kind of overhaul everything. Next year, I wouldn't be surprised to see them invest fairly heavily in their offensive line again. I think, to me, that's really where it's all going to start.
So that's for you. So you think the Steelers will agree? Because I think offensive line is important first, and I think your philosophy and their philosophy will marry. I'm going to give you another position group. I think right now in the National Football League, pass rush is extremely important. I think we all agree. The front seven is extremely important. But I think what we've seen over the last several years, and even before that, is you can scheme away pass rush. Pass rush at times can be inconsistent. But the one thing you have to do almost every single snap, particularly in this league, is you have to cover. And right now, when you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, they have a situation where they don't have a nickel corner. And that's an issue. And like you said about Cam Sutton, they may not have Cam Sutton too long in the future as well. I think also where you saw a lot of their success when they built that offensive line is they finally got a secondary that was really good under Tomlin. It took years for it to happen. When they had Sutton, they had Nelson, they had Hayden, Fitzpatrick, Edmonds. They finally had a versatile secondary for a few years that was really good and played at a high level, and that you could argue was one of the best secondaries in the National Football League. I think the other thing that you have to do in a rebuild is you have to get guys that are versatile, and you got to get guys that can cover. You have to get a secondary that can hold up and stand up against some of these dynamic passing offenses in the National Football League. I know people will go back and forth in terms of what's more important, front seven, pass rush, or secondary. But I think right now, with all the quick game that you see in the National Football League, passing out a shotgun, guys getting out of their hands, you can just see how pass rush it can be neutralized. So my thing would be, I think one of the big position groups that you have to target and that you have to build is the secondary, and you've got to find guys that can play on the back end.
I'd agree with that. It's fairly stated. And I'll say this. The Steelers couldn't plug every hole in the dam in this draft. They had to get the ones that they could where they were drafting. They weren't able to move. They didn't have as many picks as they probably would have wanted. I'm not going to get into the 5th round thing, whatever happened there. But I don't think cornerback was the right position considering who was available at where they were picking in any of those picks. But I do think you needed a running back, you needed a tight end, and you needed a center. So the fact that they addressed those, it's good. This doesn't explain why you cut Steven Nelson or whatever happened there. I get the feeling we're going to hear. I get the feeling we're going to hear about that a lot more in depth come closer to the season. But something happened there that makes me believe that it was less about the salary cap space that Nelson opened up. I would have thought Hayden would have been the better bet if you were going to do that. But we'll say this. One thing we know is, as far as the Steelers go, they were going to have to invest in some long shot kinds of guys. They were going to have to find a way to get some run out of lesser desired players in this draft. And I'll say this. Trey Norwood, I think they're playing him as a safety, but Trey Norwood fits the Steelers defense, I think, better than any player they took defensively this year or even last year. I think what he's capable of doing schematically creates an interesting situation for them moving forward. Can he develop to be the type of guy that they need him to be? He might be the guy to play alongside Minkah in the future, and he's going to be cheap for a while. That's a good thing. Obviously, in undrafted free agency, you took Shakur Brown, a player who had a pretty good amount of collegiate success. He looks like a pretty solid player. He didn't run as fast, I think, as people would have wanted a player to run if he's going to play cornerback in the NFL. But I don't think he's a bad cornerback either. I think technically speaking, he's pretty good. I think he's a player who, as an undrafted guy, makes the team this year. It wouldn't surprise me if he did. It pushes another Michigan State guy, Justin Lane, who's done nothing since he joined the Steelers except get arrested. And once again.
So Neil, what do you call those players?
Something called Justin Lane. Something called, forgetting the other guy's name. I've been stumbling on it for 10 seconds. I'm not even doing this on purpose. I swear I forgot his name. But that guy, I'm sure it's not to say that he's not a good player, he can't develop or anything. It's just that we're putting an awful lot of stock into players that we've never seen before, yet we savage perfectly average players who play all the time. Terrell Edmonds gets beat up by fans on a constant basis, but he's not Justin Lane. But Justin Lane is he could be good guy, or the undrafted free agent that I'm talking about, or the 7th round pick that I'm talking about. We're quick to thrust these guys into roles. And yeah, I obviously do it too, but the good players who are on the team who have shown themselves to be good players consistently can provide something to the team. They need to bolster the depth behind them. And cornerback was the position they really just couldn't afford to do this season. But that doesn't mean they're not going to address it fairly soon. They're still in free agency. There are still veteran corners out there that they could round them out to be a fairly decent depth chart at cornerback. I think they're all right at safety for this season. Moving forward, it might be a different story, but they're still able to make a move or two. And I think they're going to go bargain shopping and see if there isn't a veteran out there who either could play the slot or provide some decent depth in the dime position or fifth cornerback even. They needed to rebuild, though, and they still are. That was one position they couldn't address with a pretty good to a high level guy to this point in free agency or in the draft.
So let me hit it back to you. So we got offensive line, we got cornerback, secondary, whether it's corners, safeties, whatever. Give me another position group, in your opinion, that you would prioritize and you think the Rooneys will prioritize in their rebuild. We're going to save quarterback for last, because I want to ask you a question specifically about quarterback. What's another position group?
You took the coverage positions away, but I will add, branching off what you said about the edge rushers. And I say that because that position's about to get a lot more expensive for him. And it was kind of rough with Dupree making what he made last season, but Watt is going to make twice that probably if he signs an extension. They're going to have to tag him for roughly the same amount of money. They're going to have to spend at that position, and they still probably need some depth. Forgive me for not being one of the Steelers people around who are psyched up about a 6th round pick coming in and being the primary backup at two positions. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to need to look at a veteran. The word is that they at least had a conversation with Ryan Kerrigan, a veteran who signed with the Eagles last week or the week before. It wouldn't surprise me if they're looking for a bargain. They want to pick up a veteran. Keep in mind that the veteran minimum rules say that if they sign a guy with a bonus threshold under a certain amount, he counts for the amount of like a 5th-year player against the salary cap, which in this case would be something like $300,000. So that's a solid deal if they can get it for a proven veteran backup who isn't going to play. That I think that's probably what went south with Kerrigan, is the fact that, well, they need Hightower to be a high-level guy, and the Steelers don't take their outside linebackers off the field unless they're injured. They're playing outside linebacker, so you can count on Watt and Hightower for obvious reasons being their primary guys. But you still need a veteran backup there, and you don't know what's going to happen with Watt next season. You don't know. I'm not trying to rip on Steelers fans or Pittsburgh in general, but there's always this sense that players feel as passionately about the area, the history of the team, all of that they do. If TJ Watt really, really wants to be tough in negotiation, he absolutely could. He's going to have a real tough time having any team say no to him for the amount of money that he is able to command for what he's done to this point. He might be the most expensive pending free agent that the Steelers have ever had.
No, he is. He will be. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let me preface that by saying, even if we were to factor in, it's not exactly inflation, but Ben's contract in 2011 obviously doesn't cost what Watts is going to today. But for a defensive player to have that level of command over a team, are we 100% positive the Steelers are going to go for that? Do they want to sign an outside linebacker for that much money? A team that focuses on it, that drafts it well, that has coached it fairly well, with the exception of a guy or two here and there. They found guys that can come in and be Pro Bowl or all pro level players pretty consistently. Do they want to spend the amount of money that it costs to sign a high level quarterback today on that position?
Juxtapose that against this. They developed Watt. So we're saying O-line, cornerback, and edge. Those are the three groups. They developed Watt, and Watt was a low first round pick, right? So they developed him. So that's there already. Now juxtapose that against the fact that they are rebuilding. If you're rebuilding, does it make sense necessarily to spend that much money on an edge rusher when you don't have the most important position in football, the quarterback? And let's jump to that. And we had a conversation a while ago about the next quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We talked about how we didn't think that the next quarterback for the Steelers was on the roster. You threw a name out to me in Gardner Minshew as a guy that could be a stopgap guy for this transition period, this rebuild period for the Steelers. And Neil, you're getting bashed in the live chat. I'm just gonna
Sorry,
I'm gonna
my bad.
it's
If it helps, I check myself in my own head each time I did it.
Yes, and hey, this is why we do this show that's on YouTube. We are going to make mistakes. And Marcus J, big up to Marcus J. I posted the RAS score for Brown.
Yeah,
and RAS
he didn't
score.
test well. He didn't test well. He also wasn't drafted. So frankly, you're not paying the premium that you do for a high level athlete. Watch him play though. The kid can play. He is functionally faster and more athletic on the field than he tested. And I'll admit flat out, he tested poorly. It was bad. I am usually very much a test friendly guy, but you watch his film for the price that they're paying for him. I wouldn't have drafted him in the first round after that. Okay, I definitely see why teams didn't draft him, but I think he's a guy that you have eyes on to play. I think they want him on the team. He's a better athlete than what we saw testing, and that happens. I'm not saying that to bank on any player that shows any kind of productivity on the field to be great functional athletes when clearly they're not. I see a fairly decent athlete, not a great one. I would have said that before he tested. He's acceptable. I think he can work in for a team that doesn't have ultra elite athletes at their cornerback positions most often. Ike Taylor was blazing fast, but overall he wasn't a great athlete. He was just built like one. He played functionally well for him. I think that's what they want. Mike Hilton wasn't a great athlete. He was a damn good slot cornerback. That's what they need. I think you see the quickness, the shiftiness of Brown. I think that's the kind of player that they're banking on him being. I get it though. I get it.
So let's get back to the whole quarterback thing, and it's kind of percolating about trading TJ. No, I don't think they're going to trade TJ. They've got TJ paid for the 5th year. They're going to play and try to re-sign him and try to figure something out. You're definitely going to get that last year of TJ Watt. I mean, he's the best, arguably the best or second best defensive player in the National Football League. But
I bet a bundle on him tagging him next year.
Yeah, I mean that's the obvious move to do to keep the cost down instead of giving him this astronomical contract. You do that as the bridge to what we're going to do in the future, and you kind of take it year by year if you can, or you slow the process down in terms of when you have to sign him to that next big deal. But we're talking about this quarterback position, and I think when you rebuild, essentially you have to find the quarterback. You talked about it earlier, that gap between Bradshaw and Ben Roethlisberger, where the Steelers had a ton of success, but they never had that next guy to take the franchise to the next level. And when they got Ben, what happened? They won 2 more Super Bowls. Now they have 6. And now they had a 2-decade run of success because they had the quarterback guy. And so in this process of trying to identify this next quarterback, you never know how long it could take. It could be next year's draft. It could be 10 years. It could be 15. So there's quite possibly, odds would suggest, you have to find a bridge guy during this rebuild. Let me throw out some names because I thought the idea of Gardner Minshew as a bridge guy while you're trying to find the next guy, not necessarily if it was him or not, was a great idea and a great concept. I have no faith in Mason Rudolph. None whatsoever. So I don't think Mason Rudolph is the guy that could be the bridge guy. So let me throw out some names. And because I use the word bridge, I'm going to start with Teddy Bridgewater. And this is guys who are free agents in 2022, 2023. So not this upcoming season. Fitzmagic, Cam Newton, Andy Dalton, Jacoby Brissett, Tyrod Taylor, Mitch Trubisky, Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill, Sam Darnold, Flacco, Marietta, Bridgewater, and Nick Foles. Of that list, does any name excite you? One,
not at all.
And 2, do you think the Steelers will go this route and try to find a bridge guy while they're doing this rebuild?
I'll say this. I would not be surprised if one of those names is on the team next year. I think That said, you gave Rudolph a 1-year contract in advance, I think, to try to have some continuity going into camp. Both he and Haskins will have a year together in the room. Probably, we can fairly say that Haskins is going to be on the team this season. They each have a year under Matt Canada, who knows both of them this time next year. They're going to have a better and a clearer picture of what they want to do at the quarterback position. But can we say in March they will definitely know that one of those two is a starter? I think, and I'll throw a fourth option into this. If the player is not coming from that list, the player is currently under contract somewhere in the NFL. I don't think it's going, or it's going to be they're taking somebody in the first round. Whether or not that player will be expected to start really kind of depends on who it is. But it would not surprise me if it's round 1 quarterback of 2022 versus Rudolph versus Haskins. If it's not the draft pick, though, it's going to be somebody off of that list because, let's be honest, I gave up trying to determine for myself who the next Fitzpatrick was going to be because it's always Fitzpatrick. And there's like 17 other guys who have the same makeup for that kind of career. Joe Flacco actually didn't play all that badly last year, to be honest. He wasn't terrible. Jameis Winston can still throw the ball probably better than all but maybe 3 or 4 guys in the league. The guy's got arm talent for days. A phenomenal player. Teddy Bridgewater is probably the closest thing to Fitzpatrick that we'll see, and his career is shaping up like that. He goes on teams where he doesn't even play anymore and gets traded. There are a lot of guys out there that are going to be able to handle themselves in an NFL environment, and the Steelers know that. And those guys, the more of them that there are, the more of a bargain it's going to be to pick them up. So the question, I think, comes down to whether or not they want to give up a fairly significant capital to draft one, which I think is ideal. That's really where they would like to go if they could just get one at the spot they're drafting, and that can be the guy, very similar to what happened with Ben. That would be the choice. Otherwise, this is the real monkey wrench to it all. Which quarterback next season is upset with his contract, upset over the direction of the team, whatever, because we had plenty of them this offseason. Who's it going to be next year? That's to me, I'll say it because of this. The Pittsburgh Steelers starting quarterback job, when there's basically no competition there, cap space available, that's going to be pretty attractive to a Russell Wilson type, to a Deshaun Watson type. They're going to like the idea that Pittsburgh's job's open. All of a sudden now, I want you to draft these 4 receivers. You're not going to? I don't want to be here anymore. Trade me. It's the trend. We've seen this in the NFL. It's only just recently that we've seen quarterbacks act on it. And I think the 2 players I mentioned, I wouldn't be surprised if both of them are open next season. Next season is really tough for Watson, but if Watson wants to leave that badly and this would want him, they renegotiate the deal. It's going to cost you a boatload of picks, probably in either case. Maybe not so much Wilson, but it's going to cost a lot to do it. Do they want to go that route? I'm not against that, to be honest with you. I think getting a proven commodity, a guy who knows how to play and can lead the team the second he walks in the building, that's what they need. Because right now they're screwing around with Mason Rudolph and probably Dwayne Haskins or the list of Ryan Fitzpatrick clones that you listed off before.
And Devin Snowden said, I like that option. I think the reason why
I made myself up in Devin's mind now.
I think why that's the best option is because it allows you to do 2 things at once, which is very hard in the National Football League. And what I'm going to describe is probably the hardest thing to do in the National Football League is to win and rebuild at the same time.
Yep.
That's almost impossible. And that's what the Patriots did with Tom Brady. They, over the course of his 20 years, they were constantly rebuilding, reshuffling that roster, bad drafts after bad draft, but they had the greatest quarterback of all time. And yes, I am saying Brady is the GOAT. I look, it's taken me this long to say it. It's hard for me to say, but yes, I am on record, man. The man has 7 Super Bowls, went to Tampa Bay, a terrible franchise, and gave the Patriots the FU Super Bowl for the 7. But I disagree with Snowden with Devin Snowden here, it will allow us to stay relevant. I don't think relevancy has anything to do necessarily with current winning. For some franchises, maybe, but not for the Steelers. When you're a historical franchise and you've accomplished as much as the Steelers, you will always be relevant. And you see that, if you want to see that, you see that in TV. You always can see Steeler games. They get their primetime games. You always will see 4 or 5 different Steeler games and some big spots and some big moments. Steelers will always stay relevant for the fact that they are the Steelers and they've had success. So relevancy is not something that they're necessarily chasing at all particular times. But
I think maybe what he means is competitive, to have a chance. I would define it very simply as actively choosing to not go into training camp next year with Mason Rudolph, the assumed starter. That in and of itself means you're trying, But at the same time, I don't know. I don't know what their plan is. But in my opinion, relevancy in the sense that other people will feel like the Steelers are trying to do something is beside the point. But you know who's done not to the level, obviously not even close, but has been the focal point of a team that's trying to rebuild with a good quarterback and still having success. Russell Wilson. It's probably part of the reason why he doesn't want to be there.
Yeah.
So he's asking to be traded. Chicago decides to draft the quarterback. They have to give up capital again to draft another quarterback. I don't know how Ryan Pace still has a job. The job security that man has is amazing. But if you're the Steelers next season, you have to think Wilson's price goes down a little bit. Age, another year. His cap hit isn't going to be too big. Teams are going to think at some point, if this is still going on, if he still wants to be out, they're going to have to cut him if something can't be worked out. So our asking price is going to be a little bit lower. I wouldn't be surprised to see them make a move on a player like that. Maybe not Wilson, but I think Wilson's a prime example of the market that is being created inside the NFL right now. And that is largely because quarterbacks have all power for everything we just discussed, for every single reason. You can't rebuild without a quarterback, okay? You are never constantly rebuilding. Whether you're winning or not, you're not rebuilding if you don't have a quarterback. So really, if you think about it, the quarterback can just say, look, there are 6, 7 other teams here who would love to have me. If you're not going to Aaron Rodgers syndrome, if you're not going to draft the receiver that I want or whatever Rodgers' complaint is today, if you're not going to do things the way that I want it, I don't want to be here. And when you're Aaron Rodgers, when you've been paid $200 million already and you have a score of possibilities beyond football, Drew Brees signed his TV contract before he even retired from the NFL. They have options. Peyton Manning would be paid more than any media professional in the world if he wanted to go into a booth. They have those options. They're quarterbacks. So when you get up in years, what's the point? If you don't do things my way, why do I want to be here? Tony Romo turned down a lot of money and then became the most popular broadcaster in sports. And on top of that, he's like a scratch golfer. He's trying to be professional at that as well. Does he want to continue to be a quarterback? Maybe he doesn't. Maybe Russell Wilson says, you know what? I don't really need this anymore. I've got kids now. I've got a slamming wife. I'm doing fine. I've been paid plenty. I don't want to deal with John Schneider's bullshit anymore. I'd rather go somewhere else, do this the way that I want to do it, or I'll just retire. I don't need this anymore. It's not costing me anything that I can't pay back easily. I have other options that will help with that. They have much more power. They have leverage over teams. And I think an extremely attractive option for them to finish up their career would be the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it's a team that has a need for it. And it's going to have a good defense. So, hey, why not? This looks good. I can play there. They're going to pay me roughly the same. We have to work out a few things. But, draft picks, whatever. We got guys now. Shelf life of 3 years here anyway. I don't really care. Let's do it.
So I'm going to ask you to be Neil Stradamus. And if I look at this list, and I'm going to be Lance Stradamus right now. If I look at this list, and I'm going to ask you to be Neil Stradamus as well. if I think we all love the option of possibly getting a very good quarterback from another roster to be on the Steelers roster next year. Not sure, that there's a lot of moving parts there. No one is excited about Mason Rudolph. I think the fan base would be more excited if Haskins shows something. You get the physical skills of a first-round draft pick on a reclamation project. and he's your next guy for the next couple years. Keeps your salary cap at a manageable spot where you can build a lot of other positions. If I look at this list that I tossed out to you, I like Jacoby Brissett. I would like Jacoby Brissett to come in just on a manageable 2-year deal. Something small on a 2-year deal, keep some salary cap flexibility. So if I'm going to be Lance Stradamus, I think that the quarterback is from this list next year. Fitzmagic, Cam, Dalton, Brissett, Tyrod Taylor. Trubisky is terrible, though. Winston, Hale, Darnold, Flacco, Mariota, Bridgewater, or Foles. Love the Bridgewater guy. I could see that as well. Brissett is a guy that I could see being sort of that bridge guy to the next guy. I think what would excite the fan base the most would be grabbing a veteran from another roster and putting that guy, a guy like a Watson, like you described, or somebody like of that ilk to be the next guy, and that just puts Steeler Nation in a frenzy. I think that is the ideal, or ironically enough, a first-round draft pick. I think if you got a first-round draft pick guy, Steeler Nation explodes as well, and it's like, we're back, I got a feeling we're going to be the first to 7, and you start hearing all the songs in the parade. Be Neil Stradamus.
I'll be Neil Stradamus, and I'll point out right now, 2022 Russell Wilson, base salary of $19 million, roster bonus of $5 million. That would give him a salary cap number in Pittsburgh of $24 million. Only $5 million of it is guaranteed, and that's assume the trade is there anyway. Guaranteed doesn't really matter at that point. You weren't going to cut him, so $24 million. All right, that is Ben's dead money for this year, as it is. That's dirt cheap. Okay, Seattle's already paid him a bunch. You might need to work out an extension with him. The next year, 2023, $22 million base, $5 million roster bonus. So the salary cap number increases all the way up to $27 million, which is nothing for a quarterback at that point in comparison to the top guys. And you have an open. You're able to do a ton of things salary cap wise if those are the 2 years that are left on his contract. You can very easily work an extension that's not going to be painful to do, not create the pig in the python thing that they had with Ben all those years where he became upside down in that his previous prorated bonuses are worth more than his base salary is. They're able to get Russell Wilson on a very, very cheap deal next season. That might cost you some picks, but that's he's 34 next year. Some people might be turned off by that. That's a very, very attractive trade situation. For me, I can't ignore that. If you can't get it done, moving up to get a surefire rookie, I think 5 years with Wilson playing at probably a very high level, the way that he plays now, that's pretty nice. I think to me, that's an investment I think the Steelers would look at because it makes perfect sense. I think that's probably why they're not trading him now. He has a lot more value next season. And a place like Pittsburgh, knowing what it is, knowing the team that will be in place defensively, assuming Watt is there, something horrible went wrong if Watt's not on the team next year, tag or extension, one way or another, he's going to be there. And they can easily fit him in for what they have. And your option is right now, Rudolph, Haskins, unknown rookie that you probably, knowing where the Steelers are drafting 13, 14 overall, which is not the spot for the surefire guy. That's the Mac Jones spot. Do you want Mac Jones for 5 years or Russell Wilson?
Mac Jones.
Yeah, I don't want. I'd rather have Russell Wilson over 5 years than Mac Jones. That's just me. So I'll pay the premium for Wilson.
So let's conclude with this last question. And so I love that Neil Stradamus. I think everybody in Steeler Nation will sign up and raise their hands for Russell Wilson being a Steeler quarterback next year. And the reason why Neil got to the 24 and $27 million number is the Steelers are not on the hook for the proration in a trade. So that's where they got the number. And if you're in the live chat, I put the link to Russell Wilson's cap numbers in the chat, and you can go look those there. Snowden said, I'd rather have Matt Jones than Mason Rudolph. I think everybody would rather have Matt Jones than Mason Rudolph.
Mac Jones went 15 overall.
Yes.
Rudolph went in the third round and got like $10 an hour raise. So
yeah, exactly.
I think anybody's not making that argument.
Well, let me ask you this, and let's conclude the show with this last question. How long will this rebuild take?
It's going to have to take 2 years if you want the guys that you have currently in charge around. If it's going to be longer than that, I probably need to start over. Just for, like I said at the beginning of the segment, um, sometimes it's not about the skill of the guys who are there. It's just the fact that you need to go in a completely different direction. You're not always making the same hamburger all the time. Sometimes you need to change it up, and there are other people that have more experience in making that other product than the people that you currently have. So for me, the fact that they are giving Tomlin and Colbert 4-year extensions, to me, it's a 2-year deal, and they should be competitive again to the level that they want to be competitive. They don't sell out entirely to have the chance to win a championship. They feel they're at that point all the time. They did that last year. They spent a bunch of money and retained Bud Dupree. In my opinion, the first guy they ever tagged without the idea of negotiating an extension long term. You put all that together, to me, it really suggests probably 2 seasons. They should be more competitive in 22 than they are now. But we'll see. I mean, it depends on who you get. It depends on how they develop. No team wants to not be competitive unless they're totally tanking, which the Steelers aren't going to do. So I'd say it's 2 years.
I don't know if I disagree, because I think you said a good point where I think the time frame for the rebuild is tied directly to Colbert and Tomlin. That is the mark of delineation that or the line of delineation that they're trying to do it, and they're trying to do it in that same time frame. I think it's all going to hinge on the quarterback. If they do the move to try to get the quarterback a proven guy like Russell Wilson or say Watson, then they're trying to do it rapidly. And I don't think I would disagree with that. I don't think the fan base is patient for it. I'm not patient for it. I don't want I can't go through, I don't even know if I'll, be on a planet that long. Who knows? I mean, I can't go through like 19, 20 years between Bradshaw and, and Big Ben.
Or like
so I
6
think
Mason Rudolphs in that time.
So I think what we're saying in terms of the biggest priority in this rebuild, and we knew that it was, and that's why we saved it for last, because it's the obvious one. It's the quarterback position. Until you identify that next guy, you're treading water. But before we get out of here, Neil, what do you have coming up on the site? What are you spotlighting, or is anything you want listeners to try to find on the Wire networks?
Just stay active. The off season is a lot of fun. We really enjoy it. We embrace the idea that this is really the creative time of the year. We don't feel that the mainstream, high level traditional outlets put as much into coverage at this time of the year as we do. And this is the chance we really kind of get to dive into things at a much more detailed level than we can when there's a lot more churn. There's a lot more obvious news stuff that we have to do. We can really extrapolate what's going on and tell better stories that way. So we embrace May. That's kind of our motto.
Everybody on the live chat, I want to thank you guys for hopping in on the program. We're going to be again off next week for Memorial Day, but we're a fairly new show, so there's some content up there that's fairly recent that I think you guys should dig in to, that will give you kind of a glimpse of the goals and what we're trying to accomplish with this particular show. And it's to be more topical, be a little more creative and more topical, to kind of take more of a 32 or 64,000 foot view as we look at the Steelers. During the season, we'll probably be more focused on the game somewhat and give our opinions of the games and breakdowns of that nature. But I think I love this time of the year. And Marcus J said it, we don't rebuild, reload. And I think that statement, I'm trying to think that statement, I think that's a Miami, the Hurricanes. I remember hearing that statement all the time with the Hurricanes. And do like Devin Snowden did. If you're listening to the program, make sure you go to YouTube, do a search for The New Standard, Lance Williams, New Standard, Neil Coulong. Find the show, like the show, subscribe, hit the like button, do all those things. We are doing everything we can to get monetized as fast as you can. And you might see my beautiful mug on all platforms, Twitter, Instagram, different stuff, as I do these videos to try to promote the show, which are pretty fun because I try to do them in one take and it's like 30 seconds. And so sometimes they come out good, sometimes they don't. But again, thank you everybody for chiming into the show. And we did a great job today, Neil. We're going to get it to almost exactly an hour, which was fantastic. And I appreciate you as always, Neil, for hopping on the show. Sorry, we're going to have to conclude the show and you have to go back to your yard work. So
Yeah.
make sure you get those
Staring at me
honeydews
now.
done. She's staring at you now. So I'm going to let you go. And with that, I want to thank everybody for chiming into the show. And as always, tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe.